Welcome back to the show. This week we have something a little different. I was part of a workshop at a recent military physician conference where we presented a workshop about functional medicine. These were mostly military physicians and members of the military presenting with me. Part of my task at this conference was to interview our guest today, Josh Lindstrom. Josh is a very special, very unique guy. He's a Special Forces weapons sergeant. He's a Green Beret, won a Purple Heart in 2012 for his being in an IED explosion. So what you're going to hear today is the interview that I conducted with him that we presented at this conference. Now, due to the sensitivity of this information and the confidentiality of Josh, who has been really, frankly, heroically willing to share his story so that it affects and impacts healthcare in general, there are pieces of the interview that we will edit out. Now, there are some terms here that are military specific. SOCOM refers to Special Operations Command. MREs, or meals ready to eat, which are pre-prepared meals that the military uses, among other things. SF is Special Forces. Josh, of course, is a member of SF or SOCOM. He's a Green Beret. And that'll be apparent in the interview. I want to mention one other thing. Josh has gotten help in part due to an organization called the Task Force Dagger. Task Force Dagger, I'll explain that at the end of the show, but it's a very special organization that sends a lot of guys that have had service connection and injuries related to their time in Special Forces to get help that they couldn't get otherwise. And I apologize to the audience here for interrupting Josh. We had a limited amount of time to cover a lot of information. Josh's whole story takes hours to get to, but what we were sharing for you is some of the highlights of how ill he was and how he's approaching his road to recovery. And Josh is not all better, but he is definitely improving from his injuries, brain injuries, and other. And so I hope you'll appreciate and enjoy this episode. And if you want to contribute to this cause, go to taskforcedagger.org, and I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show. We're with Josh Lindstrom. Thanks for taking the time, Josh.
Absolutely.
Josh, can you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
I'm a 18 Bravo, which is a Special Forces weapons sergeant, retired, 15 years in the military, about 6 years in SOCOM, 5 deployments, 36 months in theater. 5th deployment was the one where I hit the IED and what ended up putting me out of the military.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just kind of truncate the beginning, kind of the first 20 years of life for our audience here. You were very, very athletic growing up, healthy, kind of standard American diet, nationally competitive ski jumper, mountain biking, snowboarding, sports. You think you estimated, who knows, but something like probably 40 dings on the head, maybe 4 pretty serious ones with a questionable loss of consciousness. Does that sound about right?
They're guaranteed loss of consciousness in those 4 for sure. Starting at about 9 years old. Yeah, it was my first good kid.
Okay. How old were you what year was it when you entered the military?
It was 2001 when I got to the regular Army. I was about 21, 22 years old.
How was your health at that time?
Superb, extremely athletic, running sub 13 minute 2 miles, maxing out my PT tests regularly. And, physical specimen.
Specimen, absolutely. You ended up, sort of matriculating through the military and then being on a kind of a regular Army deployment, I believe it was, in 2007 in Afghanistan,
yep.
where your health kind of took a hit. Can you tell us about what was going on then?
Yeah, so in 2007, I deployed with 1-4 Infantry to Afghanistan, small fire base, extremely austere. So everything came in on a helicopter. Water came out of an airplane. They dropped us bundles, burn pits on the base, burn feces, urinated in urine tubes. Food was all of the pre-made variety. The things that were sent fresh were in, extremely low quantities of, maybe iceberg lettuce and some fruit occasionally. Meat that was cooked by our Hazara cook, who would, go to the bazaar, get coal, and then take the pallet bases that our mail or our water had come in on and use that to start the coal to cook the meat that we would have.
And so how was your health at this time? How about your GI health, gastrointestinal health?
Yeah. Start of that deployment, I'd say great. By the end of that deployment, it was pretty much, emergency use as the bathroom.
And when you say emergency use of the bathroom, kind of tell me more about that.
I mean, like on patrol, hey guys, hang on a minute. I got to hop a squat and cutting out the front of my t-shirt to, use the facilities behind a rock or whatever. So, terrible sleep in combination with, stressful deployment, that deployment, we were in contact, at one point every day for 29 days. So exchanging fire for every day for 29 days, a lot of injuries, a lot of guys shot or blown up. And, just a general decline through that period of, my gastrointestinal health. Still physically fit, but
so physically fit. But you were going through. You obviously had a lot of musculoskeletal pain. At that point, you were starting to use quite a bit of ibuprofen, and I think you told me weekly Toradol, right?
Yeah, we had a medic on the base. I kind of graduated past the Motrin, or I think we ran out. And so he said, hey, look, I got Toradol and 14 gauge needles. We can use that. And it was bad enough. So I said, yeah, knock it out. Every week I was taking Toradol.
And then what about, I think 2007, 2008, we're talking about 2008, I think something began with your sinuses and sort of chronic sinus issues.
Yeah, that deployment is when, the sinus infection started. And I would say quarterly, a sinus infection that would last darn near till the next quarter, So, they would hang around a couple of months, started using Z-Packs pretty regularly. If I didn't have a dozen of them, from that time in 2007 till 2012, I would say I'd be lying to you. It was at least that many.
Okay. And then you went on to something called the Q course the next year. Can you explain what the Q course is and what was going on for you professionally at that time?
Yeah, so the Q course is the Special Forces Qualification course, for anybody who doesn't know, is about 18 months to 3 years, depending on your MOS. I was a weapons sergeant, so we actually had the shortest MOS entire Q course phase. And I even lopped a little bit of that off because I already spoke German when I got there. But essentially, the first couple of weeks is leadership training standard. I don't know what they call it now, but PLDC and BNOC, basic leadership, non-commissioned officer leadership, moving into like an abbreviated Ranger school, which is 2 months directly after. And these phases change regularly. But, for me, it was that moved into survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, which is, I think, kind of an important one to highlight. Extreme stress, very, very little sleep. I think during the evasion and resistance phase where we are, evading capture and then placed in the resistance training lab, which is essentially an American-run prison camp. If I ate 2,000 calories that week, I'd be surprised. I lost about 30 pounds in 5 or 6 days. I'm really not sure how long I was in the resistance training lab. I don't know. It was 3 or 4 days. And I believe we had 3 or 4 days of evasion. So no food. If I got 3 or 4 hours of sleep, I was having some extreme GI stuff then. Like I was really uncomfortable, couldn't sleep, hadn't eaten anything, in days. Then there was, the physical side of, moving over land. And then in the resistance training lab, it just goes right through the roof. So, we would have the corrections would come with physical contact from the instructors to drive home the point and interrogate.
So you were saying you were beaten, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been beaten before.
Beat up.
Yeah, I guess. I got it pretty easy, but yeah, okay, they beat us and sprayed water on us and wouldn't let us sleep and played babies crying and.
So let me ask you: this is even before the culmination exercise, right?
This is months before the culmination exercise.
This is all building up to another kind of big or significant change in your health, which was during the Robin Sage course culmination exercise. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Okay. So after you get through all these phases, after SEER language, then job training, your MOS phase. And then you do your culmination exercise, which is where they separate us for the job portion. Then they put us all back together and basically invade the fictional nation of Thailand and conduct unconventional warfare, building rapport with, the indigenous forces, training them, and then fighting with them. For me, in the time from SEER is when I really, started taking a hit with the GI stuff. It got to the point where, I was having difficulty working out, taking, no explode to get in the gym for a little while. And I've been to the clinic for the GI stuff several times. They just gave me an IBS diagnosis and sent me packing until the Robin Sage. We jumped in at night and I drank a dairy shake out of the MRE because we're going to have a movement that would take, I don't even know, could be a day, could be 2. When I did it again later, it was 3 days of movement with a 140-pound rucksack. So that's what I was looking at, trying to get some calories down. and had a gallbladder attack right there. Went to the hospital, and they, 2 days later did an emergency surgery to remove my gallbladder.
So so you're going on again. So big GI issues kind of ongoing now for about 2 years at this point, and a lot of kind of musculoskeletal pain continue, I'm sure, as you went out into operation, continued with ibuprofens and the NSAIDs and things like that. But you were still very high functioning, as I understand it, until 2012. Is that right?
Yeah. So I would consider myself successful in my job. It depends on who you ask, but I thought I was doing all right and very physically fit, CrossFit, doing 50, 60 pull-ups at a stretch. I'm repping 400 pounds on my deadlift. No movement is too far on foot. And 3 deployments once I got the Special Forces group. And then 2012 is when we struck the IED, which briefly was, I thought, pretty mild. The truck had passed over the IED, and it actually had detonated directly, behind the truck, damaged the truck. It kind of picked it back up. But I don't really remember feeling the blast. I compare it to, a door charge where I could feel my collar slapping against my neck and then my uvula smacked the back of my throat. I don't remember that. I just remember kind of a thwomp. The trucks filled with smoke, and actually, it felt good. I could feel the adrenaline go, and I didn't feel a thing. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anything. And so I actually laughed. I thought it was funny. I thought they missed again. And, it was in conjunction with an ambush. So I was operating the gun system, went to work with the gun system. And for about 20, 30 minutes, I didn't really feel anything. And then, again, there's no holes in us. So we're thinking we're good. And the next day is when, the serious symptoms started to
tell us about the symptoms, kind of fairly immediately.
So I believe I told you earlier, but it's like jumping off the high dive and landing on your stomach in the pool. Your just whole body hurts in a way that I was unfamiliar with. And I've been through, some painful ordeals, and then this was a little different. The headache, which hasn't been my constant companion since the injury started, about an hour or two after, if that. I have very hazy recollections of pretty much the rest of that deployment. I was there for 8 more months. Within 72 hours, the 3 things that stuck out were, I almost got in a fight with a much lower ranking soldier, like a physical fight, which is, out of the realm of possibility for me up to this point. And then the next day I almost got in a fight with a major, which again, there's no point in that. Even if I win that fight, I lose that fight. And then we ended up getting it right after I almost got in a fight with a major. We got on a helicopter. So I've been in, C-130s, combat landings, and that's pretty much where they take the C-130, turn it sideways, point it straight down, and then just do spirals all the way into the airfield. And it's, I thought it was fun at the time. But this time when we got on the helicopter, it picked up, and as soon as it yawed just a little bit, I had to stop myself from throwing up. And I'm, Green Beret, so I'm going to have to throw up in my shirt, which is going to be uncomfortable. But it was really, it was surprising to me that, I would become nauseous in an aircraft because it had never happened. Being airborne, I've flown at night vision goggles and all kinds of different scenarios. I've been looking out the back of a Chinook as it's flaring, sitting on a 4-wheeler, staring straight down to the ground, at 100 feet, and never had a problem. So this little, yaw shouldn't give me a problem.
Memory problems, rage, headaches, fairly, we're talking within 3-4 days of this initial event, right? So then you come home, right? You come home, and what was going on at home? Stateside with your wife and your family?
My wife had obviously gone crazy while I was gone, because when I got home, we couldn't agree on anything. She couldn't figure out what was going on. And looking back on it, I know what's going on now, but we would have conversations where we'd make an agreement, we'd make plans, and we'd make an agreement. And then an hour later, I would be militantly opposed to whatever I'd agreed to. And she would, she wouldn't get it. She'd think I was messing with her because I couldn't remember that conversation. And, you mix that with a little bit of rage, and then, the stress of, trying to hang on to the job, even though now I'm starting to come to grips with things aren't working. My balance has become an issue. Specifically, we're doing some building clearing at night under night vision, and I had taken a corner and taken about 3 crossover steps into the middle of the room, which is a cardinal sin in building clearing, very dangerous for me and for the guys around me. And at that time, I was in a rapid deployment unit, and that's kind of when I went, all right, now I'm not really an asset to the team anymore. I'm a liability. And knowing that we could deploy in 2 hours, that was when I decided, I felt it was my time to listen to the doctors and kind of take a step back.
And so then what did you do when you started to take a step back? What did that look like?
Oh man, it was a mess. That job was who I was. It wasn't what I did. So you only get to quit that job once. I can't do this one time. And so it wasn't a decision I took lightly. And I knew I'd been seeing, we had a social worker, and I'd been seeing her, and, they wanted to put me on medications. I was like, hey man, I cannot take medications and be in a rapid deployment unit where it could, affect my ability to fire accurately in a hostage rescue situation, whatever, situation we find ourselves in. And so I'd been fighting any sort of treatment up to that point. And finally I said, okay, whatever we need to do. Ended up moving to a warrior transition unit. I figured I'd just get my year, with a hospital knocked out before I went to my next duty station, which was supposed to be a training billet. So I would be there just doing training, not deploying. And I got there and as each of these things happen, you're taking your responsibility. We're taking your pay. I'm not airborne. I'm not using demolition, so I'm not getting demo pay. So I'm losing my responsibility. I'm losing my purpose for, being, essentially is the way I looked at it, and trying to figure it out with the family. I mean, how do you, my wife could have left me 50 times and nobody would have said, because how do you deal with a person who is ragingly angry over nothing, can't remember why he was angry 10 minutes later, was just, flipped the IKEA over for the 6th time.
Still having gut issues, still, all the same old issues as well, pain and all stuff as well, all the time.
Pain is crazy. Headaches are out of control.
Gaining weight, you said.
Oh yeah. I ballooned up to 240 pounds.
From what? 190, 200?
I was, I thought you meant why did I balloon up? No.
For what did you weigh before?
195, 200.
So I think, Josh, you've told me, and we've gone through this story a couple of times, like you at one point you were seeing something like 3+ doctors a day, just, for that year, seeing pain psychologists, polytrauma clinics, things like that. And, we counted, I went through your medical records, and you were on, at least what was recorded, we could find just over 40 medications. And tell me, how did those medications help you?
Those are the reasons I got worse, if you ask me. I mean, that's anecdotal, obviously, but I didn't just not get better through all the treatment that I had, and I had more than most. I got worse, and it was exponentially, my blood pressure, my triglycerides at one point were in the thousands from the Tegretol. I was on antistatins. I was on just this wild mix of medications and really doing anything to hang on. So, anything they offered me, I took it.
So you're going through really serious times. And eventually, I think you tried some hyperbaric oxygen that, has helped some other people. And I think it really helped you, as I recall. But when you were kind of on your way to the Cleveland Clinic, you were experimenting a little bit with a ketogenic diet, as I understand it. But you were still eating quite a bit of sugar. Tell us what you're feeling.
Basically, before I went to Cleveland, I'd had the rug yanked out so many times. And my behavior, I mean, I don't even know. I don't have a good word to describe it. I mean, it was unhinged,
unraveling,
unraveling, incapable of carrying on a normal conversation or being in public and dealing with people in a normal way without having an issue with my temper. And so I was isolating, not working, and, really getting frustrated with the amount of effort I was putting in and the amount of success I was having, which was basically nil at that time. It was the opposite of success. And I didn't want to be alone because I could barely take care of myself. I mean, my wife is driving me places. She's scheduling everything. She's making my appointments. She's reminding me about my medication. Without her, I'm basically adrift. I don't think I could hold a job or an apartment or anything on my own. So
then you come to the clinic and you meet Dr. Paris. What went on there?
So doctor sat down and listened to me very nicely for about 10 minutes before she stopped me with a bored look on her face. And at this point, you gotta understand, so this poor woman, she stops me and she's like, look, I don't care what's wrong with you. And I actually put my hands under her desk and I was getting ready to just this is it. This is the last doctor I ever see. And she slides a piece of paper across the desk and she says, listen, I don't care what's wrong with you, because whatever it is, we're going to put in this box. And I'm like, I'm breathing heavy, and I'm like, this box better be a good box. And she's like, we believe you. Yeah. So she's like, what we believe is that inflammation is the cause of the side effects that you're experiencing. And those things that affect inflammation are diet, injury, exercise, genetics. You probably know
trauma, infection, toxins. Yeah.
toxins. So nobody had ever mentioned any of this to me. Actually, when I was in the VA, they refused to test my blood for lead because they said there was no medical reason, in spite of the, I don't know, whatever, couple million lead-filled rounds, I've been exposed to. So I was like, okay, well, hold on a second, and you got to understand, like, I'm barely able to hold a conversation at this point. And now she's got my interest. And I said, okay, first of all, it starts with diet. I said, okay, well, now this is different. Nobody's talked to me. I've talked to nutritionists. They show me the food pyramid. And they're like, with no explanation other than the one I got in third grade. So, when she started talking about diet, and she knew the word ketogenic and diet and was able to put them together and use them in a sentence when talking about head injury, I brought it up and people just looked at me sideways, and then told me a little bit about the possible, endocrine damage that could have occurred. And, it was clicking to me. It started making sense to me.
After you saw Dr. with the explanation, you get sent to kind of a group where you learn about the diet, the elimination diet that it started. And tell us what happened when they told you you're not going to eat sugar anymore.
Yeah, this crazy lady tells me I'm not supposed to eat sugar anymore, and she has no idea where I'm at. And so she almost got her desk flipped over. But I had like a physical anxiety when she told me that I had to quit sugar. I think the really interesting thing is that I'm an alcoholic, have been my whole life. And when I did do the restrictionary diet or elimination diet and had quit sugar, I've had cravings for alcohol and dreams my whole life, and they went away. I stopped craving sugar. If I ate too much sugar, it became, even in the form of, like, the example I use is strawberries. I ate too many strawberries one day, and instead of being sweet, they were sour after a certain point. It made sense to me. Like, okay, my body's telling me, hey, we've had enough of that. It's time to eat something else now. And so my body actually changed. And the way I look at food now has changed, completely.
So you did the elimination diet and the ketogenic diet, and kind of in general, in terms of the things like pain and GI issues and memory. And what have your symptoms improved with the dietary strategy?
So, instantly the GI stuff, within a week, 2 weeks probably, the GI stuff began to improve. The bloating, they used to joke when I was on the team that I looked pregnant. My stomach was sticking out. And I took great offense to that because I'm sensitive about my figure. But, almost right away, some of the GI stuff started to clear up. Again, like the cravings for sugar after that 2 months were gone. Energy, is starting to improve slowly.
How about your mood and your memory? Was it affected all there?
Not right off the bat, to be honest, but it was enough to lose the, 50 pounds that I dropped. I'm down to like 185 now, and I don't do cardio. It gives me a headache. So
then you discovered something else, though. You discovered testosterone therapy.
Yeah. So
tell us a little bit about your experience with testosterone therapy.
So I take testosterone as an antidepressant.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that all the things that I took all the other medications for, that entire list of 40, we were searching for something that did what the testosterone does. Literally the day after I started testosterone, the improvements were, night and day. And it took a little while to get the dosing and frequency, right. But we focus on the rage thing, but I got to point out that I was crying 10 times a day. You could give me a phone number and I'd start crying. It didn't make any sense to me. And, I've never been a big, crybaby. So it was a little weird to get there. But those symptoms when the testosterone, the first day I didn't feel sad and depressed. I didn't feel tired and, like there was no gas in the tank. And I had actually taken my son out paddleboarding that first day, which was a near impossible task before, without me ending up yelling at him for something that had nothing to do with anything he did. Just carrying the paddleboard to the lake, getting it in and paddling around would be enough to put me down in a nap for 2 hours afterward. And I got out there and I was able to, dig. I did about 5 or 6 laps around the lake. And I was like, wow, this is great. I have energy again. And, I didn't really notice the mood right away. But once, I got into initially as we were cycling it, by the end of the week, I would drop off and, I'd feel exactly the same as I did. It was like nothing happened when the testosterone would drop off. And so once we got it evened out, I think the combination of the diet and the testosterone now, a year and a half later, I'm telling you, the changes are staggering. I'm remembering people's names, which was out of my scope of capability completely. I don't really even remember the last 4 years. Mood improvement,
So there's a
cognitive improvement. It's, everything that I was trying to get with all the other stuff.
And there's one other thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of your own kind of journey, which was the role of adaptive sports training. Can you explain just briefly what adaptive sports training is and how it's played a role in your kind of recovery process?
Yeah, so the military adaptive sports program is probably the single most important thing for me. I've been an athlete my whole life, and so essentially the DoD started the Warrior Games in, 2012 or 13, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to, take the wounded guys and find a way for them to play sports. And I kind of have fallen into archery. I played wheelchair basketball. I played seated volleyball, ways to get people back active. And what I said when I went to the camp for the first time was the same thing, everybody said that I've brought, and convinced to come later, is that I'm good at something again. And it kind of gave me my why back. Like, it was easy to work out when my why was because I might have to pick up that great big dude and carry him to safety because he doesn't have his leg anymore. But when that goes away, like, why am I doing something? And, for me, the adaptive sports became my why. Why do I get up early? Why do I eat right? And what I found was that I enjoyed it because to do it well, I had to relax and I had to, do some breathing exercises. I didn't realize I was doing breathing exercises at the time, but what it evolved into was essentially a metric for me to notice when I wasn't feeling right or when I was having an inappropriately angry reaction to something that does not matter. I had a baseline to go off of which I had to recreate. We don't realize how many coping mechanisms we built into our life over a course of, 30 years. But when they're obliterated in a blast, it becomes glaringly apparent that my coping mechanisms had broken down completely. And this gave me not only a metric for how they were improving, but a way to practice vestibular therapy, get a little bit of exercise my mind and learning about the sport and spending time. I tell a lot of people, most of the healing in these things happens in the parking lot. It's not happening during the competition. It was the first time in my life I've ever competed at something and I didn't care if I won. I felt like I was around a whole bunch of people that should be dead. And instead of dying, they're like, I don't have any legs, but I'm going to go for a jog, or my brain doesn't work, and I'm still going to go. These people are in the face of all the things that they're going through, like, oh, I'm going to go for a swim.
Yeah, it's amazing. My final question, though, is, Josh and you and your colleagues are Green Berets. You have unique exposures, unique opportunities, maybe some would argue unique stressors. And so maybe you don't represent the average mortarman or tank crew member or artillery personnel member or something like that. And so maybe what happened to you is just unusual and most people don't get injured like you. What's your response to something like that sentiment?
Really going off the deep end about it, which is how I feel about it. I would say that being in the infantry and being in special forces, stress goes down in special operations. The responsibility goes up, but the stress goes down. We have better sleep. We have better food. We have better equipment. It's lighter. We are more involved in the training process. You can look at an SF guy and go, okay, well, you got that SF tab. You've had amazing exposure. You guys are the most resilient on paper. The most resilient should be the most well-equipped to handle these types of things that say, look at us and look what's happened to us. If we are the most resilient, if we are the best suited to handle these rigors and how badly we're suffering as an organization because of the last 17 years of war, multiply that by 10, and then you have your infantrymen or your mortarmen. These guys are firing a 120 millimeter cannon with a handheld, loading system, or firing a 105 millimeter round out of a tank in a box the size of the desk that I'm talking at. Hundreds of rounds over the course of a career where the stress is infinitely higher than we experience. And you'll get people who may disagree with me on this, but, I've been on both sides of the fence, so to speak. And I could tell you that, not only was it easier for me to get care once I was a Green Beret, because I would walk into a doctor's office with a special forces tab. These guys that are getting hurt, they're far younger. They have more difficulty articulating their symptoms, which, I was even accused not less than several times of, not being able to articulate or maybe giving symptoms that didn't seem like they added up. And, I persisted because I've had a long marriage with my wife and she was very supportive, but, these guys are alone and they can't advocate for themselves. There are certain things you can't tell people when you're injured in the military. And I would say getting care, for those guys is twice as hard. And I would say this exposure and stress, is every bit as bad, if not far worse.
Hey, Josh, really thank you for your time here. I know time is short. Really appreciate you taking the time to make this recording.
Absolutely.
Thank you for talking to us. So that's the interview with Josh Lindstrom. Now, if you don't think that's a hero, I'm not sure who is. I mean, the sacrifice that he and others, his peers, and not just, of course, special forces like Josh mentioned, but many, many of the soldiers and military personnel that support this country really make an unbelievable sacrifice that continues to affect them. And I think most, if not all of us, know people like this. I want to leave you with one thought. Consider making a contribution to the Task Force Dagger Foundation. That is the organization that has sort of sponsored Josh getting the medical care and some unusual types of care that he'd not otherwise be able to get with his standard military insurance and other healthcare insurance. You can find them on www.taskforcedagger.org. And just a little bit about Task Force Dagger, and we may have somebody else on the show here in the future to talk more about the program, but this is essentially, I could just tell you their mission statement. Task Force Dagger Foundation provides assistance to wounded, ill, or injured U.S. Special Operations Command members and their families. Respond to urgent needs, and I mean, they respond to urgent needs. We get calls at our clinic like, this guy needs to be seen now, you know what I mean? And they really, they'll bring them in, they'll get them travel, they'll get them hotel, they'll get them everything. And the other thing that Task Force Dagger mentions is that currently their overhead rate is 7.45%, which means that if you give $1, $92.55 is going to programs directly to soldiers and families. So that's pretty lean. We thank Josh very much for sharing his story, and we hope that it impacts the lives of many, many people in a positive way. And if you are willing and able to donate, to contribute to Task Force Dagger, please do so, and we will put the link to Task Force Dagger Foundation on the show notes.